Nos fins de semana de verão, milhares de cariocas saem de suas casas nos mais distantes subúrbios em busca de um lazer.
Holler. Holler is a drama, kind of a small-town indie drama written and directed by Nicole Riegel. This is her first film. And it stars Jessica Barden, the wonderful Jessica Barden, as well as Becky Ann Baker, Pamela Adlon, Gus Harper, and Austin Amelio. This was executive produced by Paul Feig, which I was very surprised by. I was not, expecting to
weird.
see him. Yeah, I was like, oh, okay. What is this? What is this fun, wacky comedy we're about to get?
I think it's because the director worked with Paul Feig at one point. I don't know if she was like a script supervisor or something. I think that's their connection, if I'm not mistaken.
I guess. I don't know. But this movie, this is being released by IFC Films in, I believe, limited release right now. I don't know if it's available on video on demand. I think you can just catch it in theaters, but it premiered at the Deauville American Film Festival in France last September, and then it literally screened at TIFF the next day, which is when you saw it, at TIFF last year. And it also had a premiere, it was originally supposed to premiere at South by Southwest last March, but of course COVID happened, and so we're just now getting the film this month. Will, I know you talked about Holler a little bit on the show. I know that you reviewed it as well on cinemaholics.com, and you haven't seen it since. I just watched it, so this isn't going to be the meatiest review because I assume you don't remember too much. And I got to admit, I'm already sort of forgetting a lot of this movie. It is a movie that is doing a lot of things that we have been seeing over the last 5 years, right? And this is the part of the show where I kind of have to bring something up that it ruffles people's feathers. They don't like when we talk about politics. I get it. But this movie very much is invoking that sort of thing, so I have to bring it up. This movie very much feels like a reaction to the 2016 election. It literally is taking place during that time. It takes place in Ohio.
I mean, not only that, there's like a sequence where you hear on the radio Donald Trump, doing
that's why, that's how you know, right? So like there, in the background of this movie, there is like the 2016 election, and there is like this I don't know if revisiting, but there's this like sort of using of the fact like the jobs are disappearing in the Rust Belt, in this location especially. The movie frames like this town in Ohio as at times like a third world country, essentially, where lots of the people who live here are just in dire straits. They're losing jobs. Manufacturing jobs are being moved. People don't know where to go. They don't know what to do. There's just all this desperation. The movie isn't about that. That's the atmosphere, right? The movie's not about Trump or politicians or politics. It's really just about how all of that stuff sort of like exists, and it's like the least priority for these people, at least on the surface. To them, they're just trying to get by. They're just trying to like make a paycheck. And so this movie, it feels like it's trying to put a spotlight on these actual people and what they're going through, and how removed from other parts of America in general these people are. And in that way, I did think that's probably, for me, the most effective aspect about it.
Yeah, no, I mean, I've spent, because I went to school in Ohio, I've spent some time in the kind of more Rust Belt area of Ohio, not enough to be an expert by any means, but I do think when the movie's at its best, it does communicate that sense of environment, and like there's like the world building there where it feels vivid and raw, and you can like basically almost like taste the rust in your mouth as like you're walking through it. Almost, I mean, there are times where it does kind of lean into stereotypes, or it kind of feels like it's doing a very like sort, not Hollywoodized, but like it does kind of feel heightened for the sense of narrative purpose. But I generally think the movie is at its best when it is creating or evoking that sense of environment and getting us into the worldview of its characters and the environment that they live in. I think those are some of the best moments. I think those moments tend to happen early on in the film. We're establishing character and tone. When the movie is starting out, I'm like, oh, this might be really good. Like, starts off really strong. Jessica Barden, once again, very good. I think when the movie starts to fall apart is when the narrative actually kind of comes into play, and it does a lot of kind of tropey things that unfortunately we have seen several times before.
That's exactly, yeah, 100% where I'm at with it. It's like that, man, that first 30 seconds, first 30 minutes of this movie, it's so effective at setting up this world, making you understand the circumstances of Ruth's life. Ruth is Jessica Barden's character. She is in high school. Her older brother has been like her legal guardian for a while because her mother is addicted to opioids. So there's like the opioid crisis like looming over this thing. And they have like a family friend that they go to a lot who works in the factory. That's Becky Ann Baker's character, Linda. And all those characters to me, they felt authentic. They felt real. They felt interesting. And yeah, when the narrative kicks in, it's sort of like, okay, Ruth has this issue where she needs to be able to pay for college. So she has to, do some dangerous things. And, she has to like kind of navigate the seedy underbelly of her small town, which is already pretty seedy, in order to get that goal. I think, though, where this movie does not work is that I really just did not find the connection to this character, her aspiration for college and the risks she has to take. They didn't really move me for some reason. I think that I just didn't connect with her. I didn't feel her plight in the way that the movie is trying to get across, as hard as it's trying to get that across. And despite Jessica Barden being such an engaging actor, I'm actually kind of perplexed why this movie doesn't work. It feels like it should. I think like on paper, this thing should be emotionally wrenching, and the end scene should fill me with all of this emotion. And ultimately it just didn't. It ended, and I kind of walked away from this film not feeling affected by it. And that's really bad for, for an indie drama. Like, you really got to nail that. And for whatever reason, it just didn't happen with this movie, which I'm really sad about. I really was hoping that it was going to have a real effect, but yeah, it just didn't for whatever reason.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of hard to escape comparisons to something like Winter's Bone, which this movie is at least somewhat evocative of, and I think at its best it is capturing some of the great things that made that movie stand out and become such a hit. But I do think, as you're suggesting, I think the movie is at its best similar to how that movie was a great showcase for Jennifer Lawrence early on in her career. I did remember thinking, like, as a showcase for Jessica Barden, I think this is very strong. At the time when I saw it, I admittedly hadn't seen, The End of the Effing World and other things that she was a part of, except for like The Lobster and a few other side parts. So for me, I was just like, who's this great young actress that's, coming up on the scene, like this young, like early 20 something. And then I was surprised. I was just like, oh, she's like my age. And it's just like,
Yeah, she's almost 30.
Yeah. So, it just was definitely that surprised me. But I think outside of like we were saying before with the Pink Sky Head thing, where I'm like, I hope she doesn't have to get settled to doing these high schooler parts for, the rest of her career. I would like to see more adult roles from her pretty soon, but I do think she does a terrific job, and I think she is able to make this movie ultimately work more than it doesn't. But it is just a shame that second half really kind of deflates like a lead balloon. I think when the crime aspects come into play, that's where the movie starts to shake. And I never really fully bought the crime underbelly aspects of the narrative. It felt very heavy-handed, and it even like the geometry of it didn't fully mesh with me. It kind of felt like it was kind of birding itself into the narrative in a way that felt like it was very scripted and very blunt. And that's a shame, because I do think when it is at its best, which, as we suggested, is like for the first like 30-40 minutes, there is a really strong, really compelling indie character drama here that even if it is playing into some stereotypes, it is generally pretty strong and gripping. But then just when that narrative comes in, it just doesn't quite stick the landing in a way that's just more frustrating than anything, because when it works, it does work.
Yeah, I mean, it's not for nothing. I mean, these actors are clearly giving it their all. I think Pamela Adlon, she's not in a lot of the film, but when she is, it's like I buy it. Like I don't see her, I see the character, and these are rich characters, in one sense. Mm-hmm. But I just could not, as the narrative is going, I just did not find the direction of the narrative to have the right juice. Like it just didn't feel like the right conflict. I mean, how many times have we seen somebody who's like, they got to do unsavory things to make money to have a better life? That story's been done to death. And this movie just doesn't find a unique angle on it. And that's why the opening, I think, is better, because it finds a little bit of an angle. I mean, at least it kind of leans into the like very, very topical things, like, you know, the current events and like a very specific backdrop. But then it moves away from that stuff a little bit, because then it has to be this story of intrigue of like, is she going to do this? Is she getting a little bit too close to this character? And yeah, I just kind of was checked out by then, because I just thought that the narrative had lost its focus on what makes this character tick. And instead it just sort of became like, I got to do this, to do this, do this. Here's what happened. The end. And then just a little bit of a shame to see this kind of miss that opportunity to be a bit more, right? And I think that we have gotten other films that have like captured this kind of story in a more unique, engaging way. Something like Nomadland, honestly, which very different, but you mentioned Winter's Bone, you know, dealing with similar subject matter, but finding like just different ways to go about it, and finding different ways to capture the feeling of a world more effectively.
Yeah, and there's also a romance angle that's incorporated, romance, I guess, with quotation marks, that's incorporated, that I just found to be icky and kind of needless. I don't know how you felt about that aspect of it.
Yeah.
But I was just like
no point.
Yeah, no bueno.
Mayor of Easttown kind of does this sort of thing a little bit better, to be totally honest. I know you haven't checked that out yet.
Yeah.
But that's a show that's sort of about, you know, people trying to break out of this small town. And I don't know, like, I think what that show gets about these, it's not all bleak. Like, yeah, it's people are sad, people are struggling, but there is still like, kind of like In the Heights as well. It's like, people are still living their lives, and they're trying to make the best out of certain situations, and there's a balance. And I think because this film is just like so hardcore depressing, that's where I think it's like losing its energy. It just doesn't have life. It just doesn't have a way for us to connect.
Sure. And I will say though, it is better than Hillbilly Elegy for whatever it's worth. Another Ohio-based rural town type narrative. But I agree with basically what you said there.
I'm a C+ on Holler. I wish it was better. I really wanted it to be stronger, and I kind of just, the more I've thought about the film, the less I've remember of it even, and the less I really just had much to praise here. So it's C+. I mean, it's not terrible or anything. It's competent enough, but it just didn't really resonate with me.
Man, I tried, John. You know, I was just like, yeah, it was pretty good when I saw it at TIFF, but you were just like, oh man, we got to cover this movie. And I was like, yeah, you know, John, I mean, I think you'll like it fine. And then, you know, we get to this point, and your expectations had been set too high, I guess. That's probably my fault in some respect.
I knew you didn't love it. I mean, come on.
Sure.
I mean, I will say my expectations were a little bit painted, because a friend of the show, Isaac Feldberg, loves this movie. And I know Matt Zoller Cites, you know, on RogerEbert.com gave it 4 stars. Oh, wow. And I don't get it. I don't understand. But, you know, teach their own, of course.
I mean, like I said, for those like first like 40 minutes, I mean, I was like B+, A- territory on it. I was just like, this is really compelling. I love the look of the film. I love how it gets us in this world. This performance from Jessica Barden's great. It's just that once it goes along, it kind of gets, as it goes along, it goes from like B+ to like C+ at the end. So I'm going to split the difference and say I think it's ultimately like a B- film. Like I didn't mind the time I spent with it. It was my first film at the virtual TIFF, and I didn't feel like it was like a bad start to the festival. I just felt like there was a stronger, more compelling film that they constantly just didn't explore, and it just kind of felt like they took a lot of like safer, less interesting choices throughout that were ultimately for the worse instead for the better. So I felt my ultimate like, but one I felt like I could have easily loved if it was just a little bit better.
All right. Well, if you want to see the film for yourself and decide, it is, I believe, in theaters and limited release. It's just 90 minutes long. Thank you so much for listening to our show. Be sure to subscribe to Cinemaholics on your favorite podcast app of choice, or find us on YouTube. See you all next time.